Lovely stuff. Okay, so my name's Julia Davis of Yoga Teachers Forum, and today I'm here with Jane Dancey. And you may have kind of met us before in the guise of the people who run the Perimenopause training for Yoga Teachers Forum. But today I'm very much here to talk to Jane about the female pelvis. Welcome, Jane.
Thank you, Julia.
So I'm going to start by asking you where your interest in the female pelvis began. And I know that those of us who are born with a female pelvis might find that a strange question. But it's really, as somebody who has decided to focus on that part of the female body to investigate and to work with others with.
Thanks, Julia. I appreciate that question. There's two tracks to this. The first track very much started with the main thing is my experience, my relationship with my pelvis, which really came into a viewpoint when I started having issues, medical issues, abnormal smear tests. I had an ectopic pregnancy, and these things really put my pelvis in the limelight for me. And the truth is that before those things arose, I really wasn't very connected to my pelvis. I was very disconnected. So I had those medical issues arise. Also going through the process of becoming pregnant and giving birth to my daughter. And then starting around that time, I started training to be a yoga teacher. So this is about 15 years ago. Or I started teaching around that time, actually. And the first type of yoga that I taught was postnatal, mother and baby, postnatal recovery yoga. And there was a lot around the female pelvis in that. So I had my own experience of my pelvis. And then I had this I started educating myself about it. But, you know, when I first started looking at the female pelvis, I remember I've got the book by Blandine Calais. It's a classic for yoga teachers, The Female Pelvis. And I always remember looking at the anatomy pictures, and it would never really sink in. Like, I could never really get a full grasp of the anatomy of the pelvis. I would never be able to remember, or I didn't have the confidence to really feel that I knew where the organs were, how they worked. And at that time, I just thought, oh God, I'm just not very good at anatomy. And what I realize now is that it was because I was so disconnected from my own pelvis. So, you know, it's much easier to learn about something when we're in relationship with it. And when there is a disconnection, it's really hard for that to drop in, because I couldn't, it's like I couldn't embody it.
Yeah.
So I've been on this huge journey, and what started off as a sort of medical issues, very much the physical, it's gone through the whole process of physical, psychological. Then I've been looking at emotional aspects, and on and on.
Yeah, there's so much just in that initial, the initial words that you've said about the female pelvis. And we're talking about the female pelvis because you've got an experience as a woman with your pelvis, and all the people that you've worked with in connection to pelvis have been women who've experienced, having experiences within a woman's body and within the paradigm of a world in which women are viewed in a certain way. So it's quite important that we're looking at the female pelvis because of that experience, because I know there's a lot of stuff around language at the moment, and there is a huge amount of benefit in looking at the female pelvis from the perspective of somebody who lives in a woman's body and experiences the world as a woman. And that is really something that we're looking at, and the challenges associated with the female pelvis, we're really looking at through that lens, because that's the lens through which you have expertise. And I think that's, very, very valid to have that. And also it's very useful to call a spade, and so that a woman looking at your training can go, I can see this is what this is talking about. I just read an article in The Economist about how important it is to call a spade, because otherwise people don't know that they're being talked to. So they were talking about the cervix, which is very much part of the conversation around the female pelvis. And the Lancet wrote an article for people with cervixes, about people with, and women didn't know, you're talking about disconnecting, women, the concern was that women wouldn't know that when you talk about people with cervixes, they were talking about them, because there are plenty of women out there who don't know they have a cervix or can't find the cervix. So plain language is really, really helpful.
Yeah, because also with the inclusive languaging coming in, there is there is the reality that a lot of women are not used to this language in the first place. So then when then there can be another layer of confusion about, I'm sure that there are a lot of women out there who don't realize that what is inside them is called a uterus, or they've heard the word womb and it's confusing. That's my own experience. When things have different words, like the medical word and other words, and then I used to get confused about what was the uterus and what was the womb.
Yeah, I did too, and we're both university educated women, so the idea that that.
Have you heard of that research? I think, is it 60% of women, when given a diagram, could not point out where their vagina was?
Yeah, I think they might, now that sex education's on telly, on primetime Netflix, they might be able to now, but they might not, because the word vagina has been swapped into vulva so often that they wouldn't necessarily, because they think of the vagina as the vulva. Certainly when the vagina monologues were around, people thought that that's what was being talked about. And also I think it's interesting what you were saying about, we're talking about the internal parts of our body. You were talking about having had an ectopic pregnancy, about the difference between, or the fact that the womb and the uterus are the same thing. But with pregnancy, certainly, if you're looking at 15 years ago, and actually you could look at it today, postnatal recovery is often viewed from an external lens, i.e., can you get your tummy back in shape after having had a pregnancy? How do you look externally to others? Can you fit into your jeans again? How quickly can you fit into your jeans again? And I know that you've really kind of turned that on its head. And when we work as, the training that you're running is for movement professionals and for yoga teachers and Pilates teachers, people who work with the body, it can be really transformative to look at things from the perspective that you are looking at. That's why I was so passionate about making this training for movement professionals, because the perspective is so important to people who work with others.
Yeah, so I have an ethical framework, as you know, because we incorporate that into the perimenopause training, that when my framework is that I only teach what I fully embody myself and that I know, and that I've really explored, and that's what that's how I deliver my trainings, and that's how we deliver our perimenopause training. So first and foremost, this teacher training is about giving time to people to actually really explore what their relationship is with their pelvis.
Yeah. So can you go into a little bit more detail? Because people, for instance, people might think, okay, I know what pelvic exercises need to be done for women who are weeing a bit as they laugh.
Yeah, but that's the first thing I go, oh, no, 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 stop, stop. The when I work with clients, or when I do my online courses, the big body of work is coming into relationship, coming into intimate relationship, into the pelvis, into the tissues, the organs, and spending a lot of time listening and inviting awareness into those parts. That is the biggest piece, and then there is the chance to notice, okay, what's going on? Is there tension? Is there, are the pelvic diaphragm muscles, are they working in a responsive way in how they are meant to? Am I breathing fully in relationship, like the breath diaphragm and the pelvic diaphragm? It's no good jumping in and trying to fix things unless there's awareness.
Yeah. Yeah.
And,
So
and, that, and there's so many things that get in the way of awareness in the pelvis that I don't know of any woman and those with a female body who doesn't have some trauma that was experienced in the pelvis from day one.
yeah, I mean, so it is a very different way of looking about it. But when we're talking about trauma in the female pelvis, that could have been having had a one night stand that didn't go so well, having any kind of situation where the parts of the female pelvis were entered that weren't welcome.
Yeah, and it's also sort of relationship to sexuality. What was their relationship to coming into their sexual awakening? What were the messages from their family about this? How was sexuality deemed in their family home? And so forth and so forth. And as you said, the anything that enters the the vulva up into the vagina, and that can also be medical procedures where there's not proper consent.
Yes, something as simple as having had a smear test can be, and also there can be interventions which can have been brushed over. I remember when, a few years ago, I'd been on the pill for a number of years, and needed to go to a gynecologist, and they burnt out my cervix, and I just let them do it and didn't really have conversations about it and didn't think about it for a while. And then a few years later, I came back to that knowledge and went, oh, wow, I was on contraception, which caused damage to my cervix, which needed to have that level of intervention, and then was put on the same contraceptive directly afterwards, even though it had caused that. And that's just one example. I'm using an example of me because I don't need anyone's permission to share my own personal story. But there are stories around that. And you might think, oh, I'm a movement professional. It's not my remit to work with that. But when we do work with those things that have happened to our bodies, the opportunity for healing and the opportunity for strength and opportunity for all the benefits that you get from helping somebody with incontinence and helping somebody who hasn't, has uncomfortable lower back, or helping somebody who's got hip issues. That it's almost like that's a side effect, would you say, of the work that you do, is that those benefits can come out of that.
So when you're working with those issues, every woman will have their history of trauma in the pelvis, and as it is now, considered so important to be, in general, as a yoga teacher, to be trauma informed. Yeah, like every yoga teacher should have some kind of trauma education, not to work with trauma, just to be aware of it. And it's the same with the female pelvis. There really needs to be some education and awareness of how trauma presents in the pelvis. And also, if someone is going to work with the female pelvis, they've got to explore their own pelvis, and they've got to explore their own trauma.
Yeah.
To say that, you got to source it all out, but you have to have you have to look at this stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's a big difference. It's like I kind of like to imagine when people work with the muscles, and they like the idea of a six-pack. And so they work with the externals, and they do their sit-ups, and then they find that internally there's no strength, and things still go wrong. And it's kind of similar with the female pelvis, is that you can work with the external presentations of problems, but if we look internally, then there's so much more richness that can come out of it. What would you say to someone who's like, you know what, I'm an A&P person, I don't really understand how this relates to me and my knowledge of the internal workings of, you know, the fascia and the this and the that?
Yeah, well, I'd say a lot of the A&P that is taught on yoga teacher trainings, and a lot of it is quite old and not up to date. So it's really worth checking out up to date A&P and sort of functional fitness, that kind of thing. And then in terms of the female pelvis, a lot of the diagrams, the medical diagrams, are incorrect. They are taken more on the posture of the male body, and they are not a good representation of how the female pelvis is, and how how it should be positioned in the female body. And there's so much more. You know, recently I probably a few years ago, I felt like I was, you know, going through more of an early stage of perimenopause, and I felt that there may be, when I had my daughter, who's 15 now, I felt like I had a slight prolapse, and I got it checked out, and I had a great PT check it out, and it was very slight, and I worked with it, and it was fine. And you know what can happen going through perimenopause, these things can arise again. So I felt like there was something there. So I thought, I was quite intrigued of like what the system would be like. Female pelvic floor PT through the doctor. I went there. She actually she just told me to do Kegels, and she was not giving me correct information on, you know, she's saying that the pelvic floor holds up the pelvic organs, and you know, a prolapse, like they fall out, and it's all wrong. The language is wrong. The pelvic floor is actually the pelvic diaphragm, and the pelvic organs are not held up by these muscles. They're held within a connection of ligaments and fascia, and there is no falling out. And it really pisses me off when I hear this language, because language lands somatically. And if you tell a woman that your organs are going to fall out, there is so much fear, and there'll be tension, and there'll be a stress response, and then that again will affect tissues, and then we'll have a multitude of repercussions in every other part of her life. I mean, if you tell a woman that her organs might be falling out, how's that going to affect her sex life? I mean, flipping heck.
Yes. So I think that's a really important part of the work that you do. So if that resonates with anyone, spending time with Jane will really help you work with the language that you use with your clients who have bodies that are going to be affected by the language that you use. So that makes me want to spend more time with you, Jane, so that my language cannot damage the people that I'm with and can actually positively impact the way that they work with their pelvis. This is probably too big but I'm going to say it anyway, as there are some of us who have worked with yoga practices that are more gentle and more organic, like maybe started with a Schiavarelli feel, and are already, and I'm all kind of doing this, are already kind of very, very comfortable with going off piste with our practice. But there's a, actually after, I mean, I qualified 20 years ago and Schiavarelli was all the rage actually at 20 years ago. But it was interesting as, the abuse scandals came up with other paradigms like Joyce, practice and all is coming. Look into what that means. Look at the books around the abuse scandals there, and Bikram, and these much more formulaic, sequence-based. I could get away with being a yoga teacher that didn't teach sequencing, because I started 20 years ago, and the only sequence that was really there was the sun salutation, and then we played around with the moon and things like that. But we were kind of creating our own sequences around form. But then, with the Joyce, it was like very formulaic, and then Bikram was even more formulaic. And I know that there's a lot of abuse culture that's come out of those. But there may be teachers that have become very, very comfortable with sequencing and form. And I would love to know, if you can answer this, how the work you can do can transform the work of teachers who are so used to working with sequencing as the basis of their teaching.
Well, I'm always interested to see what kind of sequencing yoga teachers doing. There are some much more sort of circular, spirally kind of sequencing out there, which is great to see. But a lot of vinyasa flow is very linear. It's very masculine, patriarchal, and I find it a very prescriptive practice that doesn't really honor the female form, and it definitely does not support the female pelvis. So and we all need a balance. Yeah, that's not to say that we don't need some linear movement. Yeah, linear movement takes us forward, gets things done. The spirally is to it honors the female form, but it also honors the way that our muscles grow, our bones grow. They grow in spirals. As our pelvis tilts, goes all the way around, and the pelvis, the muscles, they really appreciate that oscillating movement. And there's also something about small oscillating micro movements really helps to hydrate tissue and bring more juiciness into the tissues, which we need, especially as we start going through our 30s, 40s, 50s as women, because our hormones are starting to change, collagen goes down.
Oh yeah, I'm definitely right in the middle of that at the moment. Yeah.
I suppose it's about giving them a space in which to try something different. And I recognize that it can be really challenging to go from linear sequencing into something different. And that I would never ask for someone to do that completely, but just to try something different. I've been there, I've done that. I did years and years of hardcore an American-based yoga organization, did so much of that training. It was all fast, furious, sun salutation based, bang, 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 big movement. And at the end of that, I found, well, what I noticed that when I started exploring embodiment and doing things like 5 rhythms, I found it terrifying to go off piste, and my body didn't know what it wanted to do, and it didn't know where it wanted to go.
Yeah.
And that's that. So there's small gentle steps to start to try something different.
Yeah.
And then there'll be a whole host of teachers who do loads of 5 rhythms, do something like you were saying, very Scaravelli, and it won't be an issue.
Yeah, but I mean, but it's interesting how much yoga that is out there is sequence based, because there's a safety, isn't there, to a practice that where you go in and you do the form, and you know that you're going to be going in and your body's going to be told what to do, and it almost decides that it's, it knows the next thing that it's going to do because it follows on from the previous. So I would love you, I'm kind of talking to you, if you're somebody who works in that world and recognizes the safety of that world. There's a beauty in stepping into your fear, and this would be very, very unfamiliar. The kind of work that Jane does would be really unfamiliar, and when we step into that kind of work, I remember years ago when I first read Uma Dinsmore-Tooley's book, Yoni Shakti, I was like, oh my goodness, I need to throw away everything. Well, I didn't have to throw away everything, because she did start within Bihar school, and then all the abuse scandals came out. So there was some recognition there, but part of me was like, oh my goodness, I need to throw everything away. And I remember I was due to go away with John Stirk. I was like, I can't go away with John Stirk. I've just read Uma's book. I have to spend time with her. And then I went to spend time with him, and his work was really beautiful and spoke really well to, I would, really recommend people kind of look into the work of John Stirk. Liz Koch, I know, she's somebody who has really influenced your work. There are some really beautiful old souls out there. I think I'm allowed to call them old if they're over 70. And John and Liz kind of meld in. It's amazing how their work melds into each other's. I don't even know if they know each other. And it's a real joy to come away from that approach, the top-down approach of Mysore School, and come into the kind of work that you do. I'd love to hear from you, because it's a 6-week training, the female pelvis. I don't know whether you can kind of delve into kind of what each week. Too much to ask you to go into. It's like, what does each week look? How would you go in? Like, how would you go in as a cocoon and come out as a butterfly from doing your training?
Okay, so I've set it up to kind of honor that sort of like a journey, a little rites of passage through the pelvis. So week 1 would be very much about landing, settling, getting to know each other, and also starting to get to know your pelvis. So a gentle hello pelvis, how are you? And that, and it depends. Whenever I work with a bunch of women, female bodies, every single one will be somewhere slightly different. So it's never prescriptive. It can't be prescriptive, because it's a bit like working with perimenopause. Everything's shifting and changing.
And just on that first week, because you're kind of saying the relationship with, because this is a teacher training, you might not have a female pelvis, and you might not have that experience. But then I think it's really interesting when you work, like I work with men as well, and to be working with a female pelvis and then investigate what somebody who doesn't have that anatomy and physiology experiences at the same time, and having people there who have a different experience. They might have a female pelvis, but describe themselves as he, him, or they might be a man with a man. And that adds, rather than thinking, oh, we can't have someone like that there, it adds to the whole experience, and it adds to everyone's knowledge. And it's really beautiful to have questions around everyone's experience. So yes, this is, the female breast, whoever is there will have their own relationship, and they're likely to have had some kind of relationship with someone who has a female pelvis if they don't have.
But also it's really relevant, if I really would love to see men come to this training, because there's a lot of male teachers out there, and there's a hell of a lot of female clients. The fact is they've got their male pelvis, and we're actually really lucky with our female pelvises, because there is a lot of information, and there are people like me doing this kind of stuff. With the male pelvis, it's very much more not spoken about, but they will have their own version of it, and I welcome all versions.
Yeah, it does make it really interesting. Having men in my classes, I love going, so how are you feeling this? It's fun.
I've just started reading a book on the male pelvis, and I was showing it to my now husband. Now I've just got married. I'm practicing husband instead of partner. Husband. And we looked at some of the pictures, and of course they're pictures of the male, they're photos of lots of male torsos and penises, and it's unusual to see those kind of images in a book, but it needs to be done. That needs to be out there as well. But the other thing about week 1 is about how do we create safe spaces, and that goes into that kind of inclusion. How do we create a space that can hold all as best as we can?
Yeah, beautiful.
Yeah. So then in week 2, it will be an exploration of why the female pelvis is an important and powerful part of the body, and what the problems that can arise, and potential ways to begin a relationship to work with these.
So these will already be the questions that are coming up for somebody who is a yoga teacher. They were like, okay, what challenges are your clients presenting? And that's something that week 2 is a space to begin to look into that from a very different perspective to one that they may have.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really loath to do a 2 or 3 hour workshop with the view of saying to a bunch of people, yeah, go out and work with a female pelvis like this, because the one of the big issues with this part of the body, and with all parts of the body, is that people arise, they've got an issue, and right, I'm going to fix it. There's no connecting in, letting tension release, forming that relationship before exploring. I'm generalizing.
No, we're so used to that 10-minute appointment with the GP. Yeah. I've got a problem, here's your solution.
I see it a lot in yoga, of hip openers, sort your shoulders out, it's like fixing, really, really unhelpful. First and foremost, healing starts with connecting and awareness, connecting, and then that leads to potential choice. That requires time and patience.
Yeah. So week 3, as I rush you through to week 3, with time and patience.
So week 3 is the embodied anatomy of the female pelvis. So I say embodied. I like to start without diagrams, so that someone can really sense into what that's like in their body. And I use things like, I have my
pelvis.
Penelope pelvis, and we use that to explore where the organs are. So I'll use touch and this to get, so people get a sense of what it's like. I also have Wilma the womb, so we look at where all different parts are, and really spend time going, okay, that's where they are, all right, and letting it land like that. That's a really important part. Because when we take that part slowly, it's kind of it allows a person to get used to the language, so that if they find themselves in a situation where they've got to talk about the vulva, the vagina, the cervix, they can do it in a way where they don't, ideally where they feel completely comfortable.
Yeah, I mean, I know that you've had pregnancy teachers come to you, and it can be really so helpful to feel really comfortable with that, because I remember having a vaginal delivery, having had an epidural, and having a real felt sense of where everything was happening, and that can be really lovely to really kind of feel like you got a felt sense of your insides, which isn't the easiest thing. I know some people really do feel that, like some people you'll speak to and they'll be like, I know every time I ovulate I can feel the pop, and other people might go, I didn't even know that I missed out on ovulation because I'm on the pill, like they're so different.
It's also about not allowing for any shame to come up of like who feels what. It's a bit like, I can remember years ago going to a chakra workshop, and people going, oh, I saw blue and I saw this, and I was sat there thinking, I don't feel that, and a bit of like, I wasn't doing it right, which we know is not, it's just not helpful to go down.
That's really, I mean, one of the skills that people will gain from coming on this training, knowing you, Jane, is that there's a real skill in sharing, in giving people space to share, and knowing how to hold space for sharing, so that it feels safe for everybody or comfortable for everyone, and people feel able to share, and the amount of sharing is held in a very careful, I mean, careful sounds like the wrong word, but like there's a skill to it, and the more we learn how to share in circle, the more we can harness that skill. So someone might come on the training and think, you know what, this is all a bit big for me. But what I've learned from it is that I can open up the groups in which I have to circle sharing. And that'll be huge.
That's an art, like if you've got 10 people around and you say, okay, so we're going to check in. How are you feeling? One person might not say anything. The other person might talk for 10 minutes, which isn't ideal. So it's quite an art to creating space for people to share, but keep it boundaried.
Yeah. So week 4.
Week 4 is looking at the pelvic diaphragm muscles and their very beautiful synchronized relationship with the different other parts, like with the other diaphragms, and also they work with the abdominals. They're very friendly with the buttocks.
Yeah, so I would just on that, because we've got our perimenopause training happening at the moment. Jane's currently, I know that it might not be current depending on when you're watching, but right at this moment, Jane is running Tuesday morning weekly perimenopause classes. Obviously, that is for people who are experiencing perimenopause or running or going on our training, but the relationship with the pelvic diaphragm is something that Jane has really quite a lot of fun with in the perimenopause classes. So if that sounds like something that you're like, oh, I'm quite interested in the female pelvis training, but actually I'd really like to know what that felt like in a class, then come along in the next couple of weeks to Jane's Tuesday mornings, because and that's something lovely that Jane does, is that when you run your trainings, Jane, there's often classes that can go alongside, and training is a very learning environment, and classes can be a very fun, open, free environment where you can take your head off.
And you're coming in the role of student or client.
Yeah, like class participant rather than learning stuff in order to share with your own clients.
Yeah, but there's always space to unpick it.
And it's great to have room for both. And so from there, and it's actually a lot more fun than it sounds, the whole, like, it's beautiful the way that Jane teaches that. What would week 5 and week 6 look like that from there?
Week 5 is a little bit what you were just talking about, pelvic friendly movement, which increases health and connectivity, and the connection to the abdominals, to the feet, to all the other parts. And very much how the when connecting into the pelvis, it has a knock-on effect to every other part of the body, but also to the psyche, to empowerment, to confidence, sense of self. When we're fully residing in our pelvis, it's like we can really access our fullness, feminine fullness.
Yeah, so that's possibly going to be one of the favorite weeks, and then coming into the final week,
bringing it all together, creating practices, and lots of time for questions and answers, but how one might, so that they're all the different ingredients, and then how do we bring it together?
Yeah, so it's a really rich 6-week program, and then there are opportunities for one-to-ones with Jane if you choose to take it a step further and would like to be coached with you. But I also know that there are teachers who've been on your training and then taken it into their area of specialization. So they might work in perinatal yoga, and it fits beautifully into that level of training. Or if you have, or you might be somebody who works with younger people, or whatever your area is. The reason why this is for teachers and people who are already embodiment professionals is because you'll have that hat on when you're doing the training with Jane, and you'll be able to take it out into your, it's like teaching somebody who is going to be embodying it for themselves is one thing, but when we spend time with people who are going to be taking it out into their community, you've got an amazing opportunity to touch other people with this knowledge.
Julia, whenever I get yoga teachers or movement professionals coming to my classes, my courses, they so many of them say this has completely changed things for me. And one of the things is that if it will have a radical effect on how one is as a teacher, just to have that to be really fully residing in one's pelvis as a teacher it's going to be very, very different.
Yeah. Oh, I'm so excited for everyone who's going to join you. How do they join you, Jane?
They can book up. So on my website, they can book up, or through Yoga Teachers Forum, and it will start on Tuesday, the 2nd of November, runs through to the 14th of December, and it's 12:30 to 3 p.m. So it's a good chunk of time to really get into it in each session.
Yeah, so it'll be through yogateachersforum.org or janedancey.com. We'll make sure that we put links in the notes. So also with our trainings, we really think about how we price them, and we, like, Jane has a huge amount of knowledge. It's shared on an online platform, so all the content is there for you during the course and after the course. But also, if you think, oh my goodness, I would love to do this, we are really aware. I run a yoga studio. Jane works as a yoga teacher. We are really, really, really aware of the challenges that continue to affect our profession. We are very, very aware of that. And if you think, I would love to come to this training, but my circumstances are not in a place where I can pay that, then you contact yogateachersforum.org and you let us know what you feel that you could afford. We'd rather you be with us than not be with us if finances are the reason why you're not making the choice. If you go, wow, I would love to do this, those are the type of people that we would like on our training. Somebody who feels really called to the kind of things we've been talking about. And also, we're always looking to learn from you and learn what you want. So we're going to be posting this talk in places where you can respond. Say, well, I like the idea of this course, but what I'm really looking for is this. Well, that's what we want to hear from you. We want to, it's important that our trainings meet your needs. So have you got any final words for us, Jane, before we close our talk today?
So I'm really, really looking forward to running it. And if anyone does have any queries or questions, put them in the comments or contact me directly, and I'm really, really happy to talk through stuff.
Great. I'm going to now thank you very much. Thank you so much for joining us today, Jane. I was really conscious of the time because we were doing an hour talk. I think I could have talked to you for about an hour on each of the modules, but I was trying to keep it contained so that it was within a period of time that people can be with us. I'm going to stop the recording now.